Hello, Dojo developers. This is Chrono Developer Relations, and I have the great pleasure to be sitting down with Nico Dulio, the founder of Caravana Studios, makers of Jokers of Neon, one of the first Dojo games ever to be featured in the iOS App Store. I'll be sitting here with Nico talking about developing Jokers, what it was like deploying a game to Starknet, what was it like getting a game into the App Store. Jokers has launched their season one last week, featuring a new series of collectible cards and power-ups, and is one of the hottest dojo games out there. So, Nico, thank you so much for joining. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Krono, for having me. It's a pleasure for me to be here.
So, before we start talking about Jokers, can you tell us a bit about the history of Caravana Studios? What was it like building, getting into dojo development, and kind of what drew you to this in the first place?
Yeah. I'm a software engineer and mostly focused in front end development. I'm very passionate about gaming and design and talking about blockchain. I've been working on Starknet projects for the last 4 years. Started working with Damian. Today he's the co-founder of Caravana Studio. We worked on some projects that didn't go anywhere really, but it was a good starting point to know the tech better. And then 2 years ago, I worked again with Damian in the Starknet app. That's a platform to onboard new users to Kaido and Starknet. We basically created a web app on top of the original Starklinks created by our friend Shrami. And then about 1.5 years ago, we started working on Jokers of Neon. And some months later, we founded Caravana Studio together with Damian and Santiago. They were already working on another project on Starknet called Starkane, and they just joined me in this path to create Jokers of Neon.
Very cool. It's the persistence that I'm hearing someone sticking through for years in such a challenging ecosystem to develop in before finding your footing and finding momentum is obviously very inspiring. I'm curious, what was it like adapting a game like Balatro to Starknet? What were some of the challenges you faced? Why did you choose that project versus other projects? What was it like choosing the project and bringing it to Starknet and to Cairo?
Yeah, I guess the biggest challenge was the UX, right? It's a game that does heavy processing and that needs to feel quick and responsive, right? So yeah, we try to hide the transaction times with animations, but there are things you can't hide, right? In a game like Jokers, when a user hits play to play their cards, you need to get the results before playing the animation, unless you duplicate the logic in the front end, which was considered. But in the end, in a Katana app chain, the transaction time is around 2 seconds. So it's not immediate, but it feels responsive. Um, but then in other parts of the game, like for example, the hand detection, when you select a bunch of cards and the UI shows which hands you have, we had to replicate it in the front end. We had it in the blockchain first, but it was impossible because it happens very quickly. And as it's not something that affects the points of the player or anything, we could do it this way. But yeah, I think you need to find a balance, and in our case we are prioritizing X over everything else. We're targeting Web 2 players, so the UX has to be on point, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And I can imagine that you face this sort of challenge where you're dealing with a game where there's randomness, there's uncertainty. The entire game is based on kind of not knowing what's going to happen next. Cartridge makes a VRF, a random number generator that we can use to generate true randomness on chain, which is extremely valuable. But that does mean that you have to wait for the transaction. So I could imagine that as a game designer thinking about experience, you're sort of saying, okay, well, anything that is truly random, you know, I can't show faster. I can't
Okay.
optimistically show that because then, or you say like you could imagine I'm going to run the random number generator in the previous transaction and I'm going to have the answer already in the client. And then I can use that to optimistically show the next move, but then the player can inspect the client and see the answer. So you really cannot try to hide or speed up the UX around the random number before you actually run it. So that's kind of like a hard limit. But then everything
Yeah.
else you can do, okay, if it's different kinds of selection screens or whatever, that's where you can push the UI to be as fast as possible because it's not depending on the randomness. Is that a fair way to think about how you navigate and explore the trade-offs?
Yeah, exactly as you said. And sometimes you have to wait. There are things that you can do. You can do like, I don't know. It depends on the game and the transaction, right? But there are some cases where you can put fancy animations and hide the transaction time, and the game still feels responsive, but you're executing the transaction in the background. So yeah, there's a lot of that in Web3 game development.
Yeah, actually, tell me more about that. I think the idea of an animation that gives the user some visual interest, something to do or to be engaged with while behind the scenes the transaction runs, that almost seems like a whole design space in and of itself. I think what comes to my mind, this is a bit of an aside, is with Google Chrome, whenever there's a request failure, you get that little screen where there's the dead dinosaur and it's, page not loaded. And what people
Yeah.
discover is that the dinosaur is actually a game. If you just start hitting spacebar, the dinosaur starts to run and it's a jumping Mario platformer game. And they just built this amusement into the error screen as a way to give people a little bit of distraction, a little bit of engagement, to kind of cover up the difficulties of having a piece of something running on the internet, which is, there's always going to be challenges. So yeah, this is not really a design space that I think other game developers have to explore. I guess, way back in the 90s, early 2000s when there was a lot more loading screens. And I guess, yeah, I guess we could say the loading screen and the transaction animation for a blockchain game are actually in the same lineage, right? They're
Yeah.
both solving similar problems, different, underlying constraints, but not so different. So yeah, I mean, how do you think about this sort of design space of animation to provide visual interest, but that ultimately isn't actual gameplay. Like how have you explored that in the process of this game?
Well, in our case, it's not really gameplay itself. For instance, we use it when a player buys a loot box, and we added a cool animation where the box opens and then you need to press the box again to for it to really open, and then you have a fancy animation of the box exploding, and then it only shows the cards, but the transaction was already in there because we sent it the first minute the player bought the loot box, right? So those kind of things, I think they feel responsive, but really what we are doing is hiding a transaction time in the end.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I feel like this is something we could almost run a whole class on. Is how do you animate? How do you provide visual interest or other types of engagement that fits into a game that doesn't feel like a side or like a sort of a total diversion, but does actually keep the player engaged. I think we don't have to talk about it so much more now, but I think it is something that I think a lot of people will need to confront. And so thinking about how we can provide examples for that is going to be interesting going forward. Yeah, so the next thing, you kind of touched on this earlier when you were talking about the Katana app chain having a 2-second block time versus Mainnet having more of a 6-second block time. How did you think about um, putting your game into production, the trade-offs you had to confront with an app chain? It's faster, but there's less liquidity because you're not on mainnet. With main, there's deeper liquidity. It's easier to have valuable collectibles because you're on the canonical chain, but then there's a higher performance limit. How did you think about that as someone kind of running a business, thinking about a game that is going to find a wide audience that's going to be attractive to them? How did you think about making those trade-offs?
Well, we currently have a hybrid right now. So the game itself runs on a Katana app chain, and the player progression, the XP, the level, the profile, the NFTs, all of that's the important things are stored on mainnet. So basically, the Katana app chain, it's disposable, right? It's only to run the games. So it's not the best, but we needed to prioritize UX. We tested the game with the community and organized public tournaments for lots of months, everything on Katana. But when we were ready to publish season one, the initial idea was to publish everything on mainnet. But when we started testing it, the UX was not great. So Yeah, each action is a transaction. The main one, for instance, the play hand is very heavy in terms of processing. So on mainnet, it would take up to 6 or 7 seconds, and
Yeah,
every other move would take three to 4 seconds, and that was not acceptable for us.
right.
So yeah, said that our target audience is Web 2 players, and Web 2 players are used to Web 2 response times. So it was either maintain Katana or duplicate the logic on the front end to show the animations optimistically, but that wouldn't solve the issue in other actions. So here we are now. It's not the final solution, I think, but it's the best we can do now. I know you guys are cooking optimistic Katana. That's basically putting a katana between the player and mainnet and redirecting every transaction to mainnet. I think we could really benefit of that setup. Maybe for, I don't know, season 3 or 4, we can have it ready.
Absolutely. And for those who are not familiar, Optimistic Katana is a major new feature that Cartridge is working on that is going to basically turn Katana into more of a full node that can run transactions and then settle them directly onto Starknet mainnet. Katana is a sequencer. Currently, it cannot actually settle transactions to mainnet fully, but Optimistic Katana can, which means that you can run actual canonical transactions on an app chain and then have them be integrated into mainnet state later on. And that is a big unlock that will give you both app chain level performance with access to mainnet liquidity and state, kind of giving developers the best of both worlds. So this is something that we're very excited about and we hope to have rolled out in the next couple of months. So that'll be, I think, good times for everyone. I do have one more
Yeah.
question on this before moving on to the iOS and native app development. Kind of what was it like to set up this hybrid model where you have the app chain for gameplay and then you have mainnet for sort of state and for collectibles and having the interaction between them? What was that? How did that go? Was that easy? Was that difficult? What were some of the challenges there? Sort of a more complicated interaction with multiple different chains interacting and settling one to the other. How was that? How was that to pull off for you?
Yeah, it was very complex. It took a bunch of months of development. Because you need to have an API in the middle, and we have a queue that basically gets all the transactions and redirect them to mainnet, but you can't do this. We have several queues, so it's kind of a balancer in between, because otherwise with only one wallet we couldn't do all the transactions, or we would have a stream response time. So yeah, it was a big challenge, but we got it working now.
That's incredible. If anyone who is not really familiar with Web3 game development or Starknet game development, the amount of heart and grit that all of these studios have is really incredible. This is what people are dealing with, and they do it because they care about the medium and they want to push the boundaries of what's possible. But it's really none of this is easy. And I think, when I hear these stories, I'm always so very impressed. So really great on you and your team for pushing through all these obstacles. The next thing that I want to talk about, a lot of people in the Starknet ecosystem, in the fully on-chain games ecosystem, Dojo builders are increasingly excited about the idea of putting games into the app stores. Kind of the way that it seems like the sentiment is going is that we really want to start focusing on Web2 gamers, bringing on-chain game experiences to Web2 gamers, kind of putting the chain a little bit in the background, focusing on gameplay experiences and kind of not having crypto be front and center. And a big part of that is getting the client to be no longer something in the browser. And while browser clients are amazing and, being able to use a mobile client or sorry, a browser on your phone client is totally fine. A lot of people do feel that getting a fully native client to the user is the next step. But that has many challenges all of its own. A lot of studios are trying to do it. Were one of the first to succeed. And so I would love to hear more about what it was like for you to get Jokers onto a native client, to get it into the App Store. I guess we'll talk about that a little bit later. Yeah, so let's talk about what it was like to get Jokers into a native client. Tell me about kind of that journey for you.
Okay, yeah. Well, starting from the beginning, we always wanted Jokers to be mobile first. Um, First version back in June 2024, we made it for ETC Brussels. A week before the event, it was desktop only, and we had to adapt it to mobile in a few days. So we did what we could. The mobile experience was terrible, but we were seeing the graphs, and almost half of the people had been playing on mobile. So it was clear we needed to do something about it. So yeah, we put a lot of effort into redesigning the whole game UI to fit in a phone screen. I think we did a pretty good job today being the best version of the game to play. But back then it was browser based. The experience wasn't great yet. We needed more screen, and to do that, we needed an app to get the most out of it. We explored progressing web apps, and it was good and very easy from an engineer perspective to go from web based to PWA. But it's still not the best, especially on iOS. To install it, your user needs to go to settings and touch a few extra buttons, which nobody does in reality. There are some apps that opens a tutorial on screen on how to do it, but we didn't like it. In the friction is very big. On Android, it's a bit easier because you can provide a download button and it automatically handles everything and then downloads the app to your phone. And this way you can avoid approvals and all that BS from the stores. That's a real pain. But as said, on iOS, it has friction, and even on Android, it's weird for some users to download an app directly from a web page. It feels hacky and unsafe, which can be, of course, because nobody needs to approve those apps. So yeah, we decided to start exploring the idea of having an app on the stores, which was unclear if it was possible or not because there were no Dojo games on the stores back then. Luckily, Daniel from Evolut had started to explore that path before us and was already working with you guys to get the cartridge controller working on the apps. So he shared some very good insights on the first steps to follow. But yeah, then we had to decide which route to go because you can take two different approaches here when you have a web-based game, right? So one is a native app, compiling your code to run natively on the device, iOS or Android. The other is, again, PWA, as we said before. And with this, what you ship is basically a basic browser without the navigation bar or any other setting that's full screen and renders your website, basically. Of course, you have pros and cons on both of them. PWA is very light. I would say less than, I don't know, 3 or 5 MB. So it's very fast to download. It's very easy to create once you have your web-based app, but you're more limited in terms of push notifications, native APIs like, I don't know, haptics or sensors. And you can also have frictions with the in-app purchases in the stores. On the other hand, the native app is heavier because it contains your full compiled code and assets, but you have better performance. And as you have all your assets, images, videos, and music in your device, it's very quick to load, even if you have a bad connection, right? So yeah, we decided to go with a native app for better performance and to be prepared if we needed to integrate in-app purchases, notifications, which we did eventually. So yeah, on the tech stack, we used React to build Jokers. It's a Bite React app with a bunch of different libraries to handle animations. But we don't use 3D rendering, so we're not using 3JS or anything like that. And with React, it's fairly simple, quote unquote simple, to get a native app. We used Capacitor, which is still a web wrapper like a PWA, but we could call it with superpowers, right? It has a lot of libraries to handle different things like push notification, haptics, and all those kind of stuff. But it was the easiest way. We had to port all the code we had to a native app. without rewriting almost anything. You do have different options that run native code directly, but not using a web view and perform better, like React Native or Flutter. But you most likely would need to rewrite a good chunk of your app coming from React. So yeah, with Capacitor, it's pretty straightforward to build native apps for both iOS and Android. We then had some issues with controller not working properly on the apps back then, but we had great support from team, and we managed to get the apps running in a few weeks, a month. That was the initial time to get the first version of the app. Not published, but ready to start the process, right?
Right, that makes a lot of sense. I kind of have two questions. A lot of studios that are exploring native apps are having the same question, which is React Native, because many people are starting with a React web client. That seems to be the first. There's a React web client. That's like almost the standard. And then there's how do we take this React code base and make it native? One approach is React Native, which, as you said, has benefits but requires more customization. Another approach that you ultimately chose using Capacitator seems like it's almost too easy. You just kind of wrap your app and then it just compiles to Objective C, which is wow, that's so great. But I assume there are also other trade-offs. I would love to hear a little bit more about that decision. And then how do you feel about Capacitator now? Do you feel like this is a long-term solution? Do you feel like this is fine for now, but down the road we might want to take a different approach? I would love to hear more about that. And also, controller integration is often the main complexity for compiling apps down to a native target because controller does rely very heavily on web flows for its session creation authentication. And so that can often be a challenge is getting a web flow to play nicely with a native app. And so I would love to hear you talk a bit about the React Native versus Capacitator trade-off, and then maybe a bit more detail about what it was like to integrate controller into a native client, because I know many studios are all doing the same thing. And I think they all end up having similar questions. And the more that we can make it very clear and say, this is the example to follow, the easier that will be able to do exactly what you did.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said before, the choice for us was very clear because we didn't have a lot of time to rewrite a good chunk of the app like we would have to do with React Native or Flutter or any other. So with Capacitor, it's very simple and it works very well for now. So we don't have any plans to replace it in the short term at least. It works very well on iOS. We're having some issues of the apps crashing on Android at some points on devices that are not very powerful. I think there's room for improvement on our side on the animations and just have the app more consistent and performing better and having like a best solution that works for both iOS and Android. I think there's still room for us to improve there without changing Capacitor for something else that would be have a better performance, right? Yeah, we're sticking with it for now. And on the controller side, what we are doing now is it basically, when you click login with controller, it takes you to a browser that's external. Capacitor has its own in-app browser that opens inside the app, right? You don't need to go to Google Chrome or Safari
Right.
outside your apps.
There's not that experience where, you're on the iOS app and then like the app screen zooms out and you shift over to Chrome, you zoom in and you shift back, right? That UI flow that takes you out of the experience is avoided.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's using the in-app browser. It basically opens the in-app browser, then it lets you log in, and then comes back to the app. And I've been talking to Gabe lately, and you guys are working on a new solution called headless controller. I
Hmm.
think it will be much better for us to integrate the flow directly in our app and avoid this whole going back and forth between the browser and the apps.
For those listening, headless controller is a backend only controller API that lets you create sessions and authenticate directly without having the UI flow that you would get with a web client. And so that allows native app developers to basically customize their flow directly, connecting to Starknet and to Cartridge's backend versus having to go through this web flow with the typical login you would get, which works great for web applications and for a lot of people, but for more advanced use cases, as you said, Nico, it is not ideal. So yeah, that's something that we're working on and we're hoping to continue to roll out and to have more examples in the weeks and months to come.
Yeah, looking forward for it. We also have the desktop version, and yeah, it works perfectly on desktop. But on mobile apps, it would be nice to have this integration so we can integrate it fully on the app and reduce the friction as much as possible.
Something to look forward to. Something else that I wanted to ask you about, getting apps onto iOS and Android, getting the app to compile is only the beginning of the problem because then getting it into the App Store is a whole nother ordeal, and I think that that's something that we often talk about as well, which is how do you get these games, some of which use real value, they can be real money games. There's risk involved, there's assets involved. How do you find communicating the value of Jokers to the App Store reviewers? What was that process like for you? Do you have any insights to share with other studios that want to get through the App Store review process and into the hands of the many, many users that are using these app stores?
Well, I have to say it's a tedious process, especially the first time, but also you get to be a bit lucky, I would say, because every time you send a new version to review, there's a new person reviewing your app. And it happened to me several times that the same version gets approved by one person and then rejected by another. First time I sent Jokers to review, the app wasn't fully ready yet, but I wanted to test how the process was like. And I got approved just like that. But yeah, I couldn't publish that version because it wasn't ready. When I replaced it for a new one with less bugs, I got rejected. And then the process started. And yeah, every time you send it, you get a new reviewer that doesn't review the whole app to give you a list of what you need to fix. At the first problem they see, they stop and send it back. So you fix that, and then they find another problem and then another one. So yeah, it's very tedious. They also have weird policies that you need to comply that you don't even know exist. I had to fight to get the controller approved as the single way of login because they want you to include Apple as a login provider at all costs, because they say it lets you log in hiding your email and all your personal data, which controller also provides with the passkeys, right? But it wasn't easy to convince them about that. So yeah, another thing is updates. Every tiny bug you need to fix, you need to pass the whole process again. Upload a new version, send it to review, wait 1 to 2 days, and then you can publish it. But going back to the progressive web app, in case you have a progressive web app, it's instant, right? Because you just need to deploy your new web version and you're done. Your app is already approved because it's just a web view that renders your website. So in that case, it's a lot easier for the updates. But yeah, talking about the process, I have to say it gets easier with time. When they see you have a bunch of versions that have passed the process already, and your game has been live for some time, it's weird you get rejected unless you are adding new things like, I don't know, in-app purchases or changing your login methods or something big. All your minor changes get approved in, let's say, 1 day approximately. And yeah, in Google Play Store, it's a bit different. When you first start, you need to have, I think it was a minimum of, I think it was 16 or 20 testers testing your app for 14 consecutive days. And then only then you can submit your first version to get reviewed. First time, it can take up to 7 extra days for them to approve it. But after that, I think they have a more automated process. I don't think they have people actually reviewing every app every time. It gets approved in a few hours normally. So it's a lot less strict. I think I never got a rejection from them. Once you get the first version approved, it's very It's very straightforward.
That is good to know, a bit of a silver lining. Would you have any tips or advice to someone trying to get their apps through this review process? Any lessons that you've hard learned that you could pass on, things that you would do differently next time, or is it really just random taking shots on goal and persisting until you're done?
Yeah, you need to have a lot of patience, I guess, because yeah, as I said, it's a bit of luck of the people reviewing it. You will need to get a lot of rejections and learn in the middle of what they don't like, or read all their policies and try to comply all of them. But I think it's, I don't know, it's nearly impossible. So yeah, it's a tedious progress. You need at least 1 or 2 months to get it ready and published in the stores, I would say.
Okay, that's good to know to have a frame of reference. Were there any major feature changes you had to make to Jokers to get through the process, or was it just small fixes and kind of advocating for yourself against reviewers who, I don't know, just maybe had a different frame of reference or different expectations for what games should be?
Yeah, luckily no, no major changes. I thought we would need to fix this controller thing and add Apple to it, so they were happy. But in the end, it was not like that. They accepted it as it was. Then on your side, on controller, you had to include also the password account, because they are not able to use passkeys or Google accounts or anything. You need to provide them with a password account, but that is ready, so you don't have to worry about that. And yeah, I think nothing else. I got a rejection last time when we wanted to integrate the in-app purchases. Um, they say that you need to allow the players to purchase things without logging in, so in guest mode. In our case, it's not that easy, because if they purchase something, and that's if they purchase a pack of cards, let's say, and that contains NFTs, those NFTs need to be associated to a real wallet on Mainnet, right? So in a guest mode, you don't have any wallet or anything. It's just a partner wallet on the Katana app chain. But in the end, I try to explain them that because of the nature of our game and the collectibles that are NFTs associated to a wallet and to a specific account, they could understand and approved it in the end.
Wow, and I think that all of the generations of developers who are going to follow in Caravana and Evolu, the other studio that was doing early native development's footsteps, I think they're going to all be very grateful for you figuring this out for them, because I think the people who follow were going to have a much easier time, and that's because of all of your work. So I think they all owe you a big debt of gratitude for that. Cool. Those are the questions that I had prepared that I wanted to talk about adapting the game to Starknet. I wanted to talk a lot about native app development. Is there anything else that you want to share or talk about? Talk about Jokers, talk about Caravana, talk about game development. You've had such great answers so far. I want to see if there's more that you wanted to share while I had you on the line.
Thank you. I just want to thanks to the cartridge team and to the Dojo toolset. It's much easier for us being able to develop a game like this with near Web 2 UX, but on chain. I think it would be nearly impossible without all your hard work. So thank you, and thank you for your support every.
Yeah, it is our pleasure. As I say, I think the people that I'm meeting in this ecosystem are all so interesting and talented and motivated, and it's really just such a joy to be able to be a part of this, squad of frontier builders doing cool things. So, yeah, obviously I think we're happy to support the teams, and it's great to hear that our work has been so helpful to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, Nico, thank you so much. This has been Nico Dulio, founder of Caravana Studios, maker of Jokers of Neon, which is live on Mainnet. Season 1 has just begun. So I would say get over there, pick up the game, get some of the limited run collectibles, play, and have an amazing time. Nico, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Chrono. It was great. Thank you for the chat.
Awesome. All right, take care.